Hi, and here we are in part 2 of getting the best out of your SM-5000 station monitor. In part 1 we looked at the display and the various options, and you can see here I've settled on the fixed band display, so I'll get the frequency displays, and as I move around the band my frequency indicator moves. And if I just bring that back onto that frequency there, and I've also left the CS parked, if I hold that, onto scope, trace, normal options, and this, if you remember, I can change that to peak hold, and now we have the display holding the peaks. So I switch between peak hold and normal, but I'll leave it parked on that setting on the CS key, so I can always jump back and forth. But first, before we get into the audio settings, which is the topic of this video, there's just a few more display settings that we can use, basically using the keys up here. So we'll cover those first, and also a memory setting on the main rig. So as you know, when you press the dim button on the main rig, there it's gone full brightness, including the SM display at the top, and they're dimming down again. There's a menu option that controls how much the monitor dims by, and on my rig it's menu 11, so it should be somewhere around there. Display, dim, ELCD, and it's on 8, and you can change that to, you can see there the brightness changing 15 all the way down to 0. And if I press and hold that to store that, it's that setting that the dim button remembers. So they're back to normal, but dim, you can see the display on the station monitor has gone right down. So I can bring that back, just bring the menu back, get that back to 8, I think is where I have it. Press and hold that. So now that's full brightness, and that's the dimmed version. So that's a handy menu to remember for dimming the display when you're using the dim button on the main rig. So just one more display setting before we get onto the audio, and that's the contrast function up here. It's a shame that's labelled contrast, because these keys are actually a dual function, and it's the other function on the audio that's of more value. If you press these two keys together, it'll either come up with a contrast display, and once that's gone off, if you press it again, two together, you'll get an audio display. So if I press the contrast display, it's on 7, and using the up and down button while that's showing, you can go up and down. I can't remember what it came with, but 7 seems to be one I want to use, and it'll remember that once it goes off. So say you're outside, maybe in a tent doing a display or a contest, and you've got bright sunlight, you might want to change the contrast as well as the brightness we saw earlier. But that's an option that's probably set once and forget, I would imagine. So it's the contrast buttons that actually perform some of the more interesting audio functions. But before we come to those, these are fairly simple settings, just in and out buttons for muting the right speaker, muting the left speaker, or combining the sound. So if, and I don't know whether this will be picked up, so there we've got two VFOs running. The left is VFO-A and the right is VFO-B. That's muted that speaker. That's muted that speaker, so they're both off now. I can bring this speaker back on. I don't know whether the phone will pick up this stereo recording. This is an iPhone recording this video. So you can toggle the speakers on and off. And now they're both playing the VFOs A and B, and if I press plus, they're both coming together. And there's a good way of showing how that works by choosing two different frequencies, which I'll show now. So now I've got VFO-B on a different frequency to VFO-A, so we've got two different stations in tune. So if I bring up VFO-A and VFO-B, so we're listening to two different frequencies now. B's there, A's there, and pressing A plus B combines them both into a mono sound coming out of the centre. Just something you can do if you want to play around with left and right speakers. So here we have the rig tuned to the same frequency on both VFOs, and I've got VFO A on antenna 1 and VFO B on antenna 2. There's two different antennas connected, and even if you've only got one antenna, I would recommend trying out both VFOs on the same antenna, because I think the stereo effect both in headphones and in the speakers is worth having. I found that stereo separation improves the readability of stations in my experience. So when I bring the sound up, we're going to hold both keys together up here, the contrast keys. Like I say, that's badly named because you're probably more going to use it as an audio function. And we'll go through the different settings, but I'll need to push the settings while that menu option appears on the screen, otherwise it goes off. Right, so here we are. I've changed frequency just to find a station we can listen to. So I left these buttons last on the sound setting, which is what you really want to do, and then you'll use these more. It's no real benefit to leave it on contrast. So if I press the left button, it'll cycle through the audio options that you've got. Clear, which is the standard one that your rig probably came with, and it might not have changed that. Mild, soft, and loudness. So clear is the sort of standard quality, full quality sound, as Yaesu put it. Mild, the high pitched tones are reduced and the bass remains the same. In the soft setting, the bass is boosted and the high pitched are reduced. And in the final one, the loudness setting, the sort of the bass frequency audio is boosted whilst preserving the clear sound of the higher tones. So you can cycle through these to your preference. I use clear and loudness. They seem to provide benefit to me. The other two don't. So if I bring up the sound, and we'll try and listen. I'm not sure whether this recording will pull this through, but here we go. And the station's now gone. Clear.
Delta Kilo 5, Bravo Delta, 59 plus, my name is
Mild.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you for your contact. In QSD,
Soft.
59 plus, 58 for you. QSD, 89 plus, 89 plus, 73. Thank you for contact. Bye.
So I think between loud and clear.
20, gentlemen outside Europe, please.
Loud.
IW7, DHC,
Clear.
Italy,
Mild.
7, Delta,
Soft.
Hotel, Charlie, call for outside
Loud.
Europe, QRZ.
Back to clear. So the left hand button cycles through the sound quality, as we've just seen: clear, mild, soft, loudness. The right hand button turns this SP reverse on and off, and that's what Yaesu call a phase inversion. And what you find that does is give you a wider stereo effect, particularly on a mono speaker. So if we bring the VFO into play, find somebody who's talking. And if I press the right hand, on, off, on, and here in the shack I can hear the sound. It sounds actually wider than the speakers, and off. So that's centered, and that's on. Off. But if you bring in two VFOs, you get a general stereo effect anyway. and I don't think this makes much difference.
Yeah, fantastic. We done it with you.
On.
You're doing a very fine job, and I have you very well anyway.
Off.
I'm running a 3-element full-size Yagi
On.
25-meter sign with 500 whiskey
Off.
PFP. KC2 MZ2W, a whiskey
That's single
390K.
VFO. So to summarise, I think the key thing to remember is to toggle these two switches together to make sure you leave it in the sound setting, and then every time you touch these switches it'll either cycle around the sound quality options or turn on and off the phase reversal, and you're bound to use it then. I don't think you're going to use contrast much, so every time you touch them that's where it's set on. If it is on contrast, if I just hold and let go, and you see contrast popping up every time you press that, you see contrast. Just remember, just press and hold, and now you're on the sound setting. And every time you press them again, you're on a sound setting. And that's something to remember. You'll use this much more. Like I said, it's a shame that's called contrast because it's a bit misleading. Another thing to remember, the station monitor has two 3.5mm jack sockets in the back for each speaker, and there's an amplifier, so you can actually drive separate speakers in the shack if you want. If you plug in a right or a left, it will disable either of these, whichever one you've used. But if you're using another sort of a studio speaker, then you can use the station monitor to drive those and still have the display. So I hope you found that useful. That concludes our tour of the station monitor. Hopefully you've picked up some tips, whether you're now going to use the display like I am, with fixed frequency, with the VFO moving around, and also choosing a sound option that's suitable for you, but also remembering that if you keep that on the sound options, you can always play around with them to your heart's content. Hope you found these series of videos useful.